This is Mxnzplain. My name is Mxnzplain.
I'm Kabelo and the two of us decided to begin this journey of just creating spaces for men to reflect on what it means to be a man in the 21st century. Our task is really to journey with men, listen to different stories, but to create an environment where we can all just learn and grow with each other. It's a journey.
Yep. So if you're interested in mansplaining about their spirituality, their traumas, and all things important about being a man in the 21st century, this is the place for you to come to.
Mxnzplain is for me, for you, it's for all of us. So join in and be part of our journey.
My name is Mxnzplain, and as we always say, Mxnzplain is for you, Mxnzplain is for us, Mxnzplain is for everybody. We want to try and explain the inexplicable about men. I'm here with my brother
Kabelo and in this episode we are really just wanting to have a conversation about masculinity, right? I think there's a lot in social media and in society about redefining masculinity or rethinking masculinity, and there's a lot of conversation or a lot of noise around toxic masculinity specifically is getting quite a lot of attention in a lot of spaces. So we just thought, you know what, let's just talk about what it means to be masculine for us, and how we've seen it in the communities that we've belonged to, and how it's shaped us really, right? Yeah. So really, the conversation today is about masculinity. So come through on the journey. Let's see. Let's reflect together and let's digest this thing. So
what is masculinity? What's the definition of masculinity to you? Not the definition, Webster's.
Webster's. So masculinity. Wow. I think my definition of masculinity is the ability to be the best version of yourself without being threatened by the presence of a female or the need to come across strong. So I think for me, so I think I subscribe to masculinity from the perspective of knowing when to be gentle, knowing when to be vulnerable, knowing when to be strong, when to be protective.
Okay.
Right? It's about knowing and having and understanding that balance.
Has this always been your definition of masculinity?
Not really. I think it came after quite a long time of rethinking and observing what the things that I liked about how some of the men in my life, in terms of my uncles, my brothers, or whoever it is, or even friends, right? Yeah. Some of the things that I liked about them and some of the things that I didn't like. But also some of the boys who I grew up with at school, or the boys in my school and how they behaved. And that's where my definition started to shift. Okay. But I think it gets even worse when you're raising a girl child, because then it becomes even more heightened that there needs to be a different approach in how my manliness shows up in front of my child.
I must say, man, that definition sounds very evolved.
Okay.
It sounds very almost like modern. Okay. North. Masculinity.
North.
North Gordon.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
Okay.
Right? Because when I think about, when you listen to just a regular dude thinking about what masculinity is, I don't know if that's the answer they would give.
Fair.
I imagine guys are just like, masculinity, like you said it, kuba munna.
Yeah.
Right? Like uba indoda.
Yeah.
And so what does it mean? Uba indoda. What does ndodaring look like? You know what I mean? What does being munna look like? And I would imagine for most people, it's probably like, okay, I have to be super strong as a guy, right? I have to be able to defend myself and defend, I guess, those that I love, right? Again, back to strength. I have to be able to provide for my family, for my wife, for Mediaka, I have to be around Banna, Baba, like who are similar to me, right? This is, in my life and growing up, this is what I've seen in the main, right?
It's almost like chilling with the pack.
Well, it's just chilling with the pack,
okay.
But this is but in that pack, it's almost like Latswana.
We're all hunters.
Okay. You understand?
Yeah.
And so therefore there's a almost like a different, there's an expectation of what Mujimos looks like.
Okay.
Right? So what I'd like to then unpack before we get to what masculinity looks like for being a father is that element for now. Okay, how does what is the accepted definition of what masculinity is? How does that play out in society, and what does that mean for people?
Yeah.
Particularly for Majita, if you've got perspective, and I'll give mine as well, and then maybe we jump into this toxic masculinity thing, because that's an interesting thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I think so for me, right, the best place to start would be primary school Kabelo, right? And I think the reason I want to start with primary school Kabelo is because primary school Kabelo was not the typical township boy, right?
Okay.
And I think by typical township boy in the sense I was not the boy that played soccer. I was not the boy that was interested too much in participating in sports, to be honest with you, right?
Okay.
Primary school Kabelo was, I was a nerd, so I enjoyed reading. I enjoyed public speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to design like little clothes for Barbie dolls, and I would sell them at school.
Yeah. For the Mpopi,
Barbie Papa.
Yeah.
And I'd make those, and I'd sell them, and I'd make a bit of cash. So like I'd find like old clothes at home, be it jean or whatever it is, and I'd sew it up into a dress or a jacket, pants, whatever it may be. And doing that got me bullied quite significantly at school.
Really?
Right. And then you realize right there and then, as young as I was, that this is not acceptable for a boy to do.
Okay.
Right. Me being seen with Barbie clothing and selling it to the girls, chatting to the girls and chilling with them most of the time. There was an attitude of, you're gay, when.
Yeah.
Right. And when I
from
reflect,
your friends,
I think not. I wouldn't even say from my friends. I think it came from the general community.
Okay.
Right. There was that whole thing of, hey, this one, the way he walks, the way he speaks English, orata dibuka, he makes clothes for Barbie dolls. There's no way he's a proper boy, right? Yeah. And I sucked at soccer. Like to date, I suck at soccer. Right. I'm not good at it. I've given up. Yeah. I gave up a long time ago. Yeah. Guys, I gave up on soccer in grade 3.
Okay.
That's how terrible I was. Grade 3 already, I knew this was not for me.
Okay.
Right. And by I suck at soccer, even watching it takes a lot out of me. I generally fall asleep when I'm watching soccer because I don't enjoy it.
And you're using soccer as like the man's game.
Yeah, I'm using it as that because solely as a child that grew up computer lens.
Yeah.
I grew up computer lens zone 9.
So that's a challenge.
And what boys did, no
challenge.
Nah.
Challenge.
I tried, bruh.
Next.
And majority of the time I'd be the goalkeeper.
Okay.
Right? And I wasn't that great at that either. But I knew I could catch the ball. I think my hand-eye coordination was not terrible,
right.
but it was just. But I digress. And I think for me, it was from there where you realize, there's a type of boy that is responded to positively.
Okay.
And there's a type of boy that is not that's responded to in a negative way,
okay.
right? And it didn't help that even at that point, I also liked having hair. So hair for me is not something that's new.
Okay.
It's something that I liked even as a child, right? And I got into a big tiff at the church that I used to belong to at that point in time, where they felt, as a boy, I should not be braiding my hair and coming to church looking like that, because for them it was not right. And I went to a very traditional, like Orthodox type church where men wore suits. You wore a suit and a tie when you came to church, and that was the look.
Yeah.
But me being me, I would wear that suit, and the tie would be sitting somewhere close to my chest, and the shirt would be unbuttoned, and I'd have a chain there, and I'd be wearing skater shoes with the suit, and I had big hair. So it just once again, it was misplaced within that community. And how the men even in the community responded to it made me realize that type of boy is not acceptable.
Okay.
Right. And then you start looking at Majita, Kabelo and Lebo and how people respond and react to them. And you're like, oh, so that's what a boy should be. Right.
How were your friendships impacted by the fact that you weren't the atypical masculine boy?
So I think for me, the bullying got so bad that I realized that the only way to survive meant to become the boy that society likes the most, right? Yeah. So my dress code then started to be more streamlined to what the rest of them, like how my gents used to dress. So I became less flamboyant.
Yeah.
I started, I stopped the whole making of clothes for Barbie dolls or whatever it may be. And I started looking at, sports. So got into basketball quite a lot. And that got me a bit of street cred, right? Yeah. And I guess falling in love with hip hop and doing that. Yes, it puts you in a different category in the hood, but it's at least a category that is still recognized as being a boy or being a man, right? So those were the shifts for me. It was in navigating that whole thing of realizing how society responds to different men based on dress code, based on hair, based on how you speak, on how you even show up.
Did you enjoy those things that you then pivoted into, actually? Like, for instance, did you enjoy basketball versus like how you didn't enjoy soccer?
Honestly, not really. Okay. I play tennis now, and I love that. Like, I enjoy tennis. And I'm just like, and a part of me is always like, I should have actually took to tennis much earlier. Okay. But it wasn't an option or something that I just didn't think about. Okay. But yeah, so I don't know.
Before we get to music, how do you think it impacted your... Because I can imagine that the dressmaking thing at such a young age, that's a creative outlet, right? So like being creative, but also being enterprising, actually.
Yes.
But now having to stop that at that age, how do you think that impacted your creativity, if at all, as a man or as a person?
So I think it forced me to find new ways of being creative. Okay. So I started drawing a lot. I started creating like oil pastel paintings. That's what I started doing quite a bit as a kid. Yeah. Because that was acceptable, right? I could do that. It wouldn't get me picked on. But I think, if I had been raised in a different society, somebody would have seen that as a talent, as a gift. It would have been something that would have been nurtured, right? Yeah. Somebody would have seen a young Virgil in the making, a young Pharrell in the making, or Tyler the Creator, whoever it is, Maxhosa, all these gens, Botepo genes who create, right? It would have been seen as that. But I think the context of where I was at that point in time and where life was, it was seen as okay, right? Yeah. And immediately everyone now is worried about your sexuality and wanting to make you this heterosexual boy who plays soccer, who's aggressive, who loves girls, who, is just debaucherous and sometimes unnecessary. Yeah. And you realize boys like that got away with a lot, even at school. Okay. And so you start to learn the tricks of the trade and how you then survive, becoming a man. Because I think for me, I wouldn't say I was a man there, but I was becoming one. Yeah. And so you learn how to survive that journey of becoming a man, because then when you become a man, you can define masculinity the way I did in the beginning. Okay.
And so you did things for survival, not necessarily because you enjoyed them, or that you were naturally inclined to do them. Okay, cool. So, if I think about my journey as it relates to masculinity, so in my formative years as a young man or young boy, before I became a teenager, so Shawela, Rockville, Pimville, right? And then we moved later on to Reveille, which is in the south of Johannesburg. And I was, for all intents and purposes, an atypical boy. Yeah. Right? I think that's a challenge too. A challenge. It's like every day, kind of thing. I was okay. I wasn't amazing. Yeah. No, I
did those. Those I did. I did do those.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is I wasn't really an outcast from Machita when I was younger. Yeah. If you can define social standards or whatever. So that was fine. But I do know that part of it was because I had a very masculine presence in the house and a very masculine example. So what my dad was that I saw every day, I knew that's what I had to kind of try and emulate in order for my relationship with him to continue to be a good one. And so listening to you and other people that I've listened to with similar experiences to you, I don't know if my relationship with my father as a young boy would have been great had I chosen to focus primarily on my creative outlets. Yeah. So I used to draw a lot, kind of thing. So and I didn't have an issue with it, but that idea of masculinity also came with its pitfalls. Yes. Right. So.
And what were those? What did those look like?
So unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, my dad was what we would call the atypical male. Right. Yeah. So My father, like he would, even in the streets, like if you mess with everyone knew, like, this guy, it's going to go down now,
Okay.
And so I had to take that on as well when I was much younger. I wasn't always the strongest kid, but for instance, my dad would say a thing like, if I got home and I got into a fight and I didn't win, he'd always be like, "Muthubile dingo." Did you break his nose?
Sure.
And I'd be like, no. He's like, okay, then kausani, muthubile dingo. So like, the fight is not over until someone
you break someone's nose.
He can beat you, but muthubile dingo.
Okay.
And as a kid, we grew up with it, like, and repeat it to be like a joke kind of thing. But if you think about what that does to you mentally, it's like, homie, another kura, this must be the outcome, And so I now wonder, is that the right thing to do for boys, first and foremost? Because I really don't know. I think self-defense is an important thing to be able to defend yourself.
For any human being.
Exactly, right? Yeah. But I don't know if it's a good, like, hey, you must. That must be the outcome. So that's number one. And then number two, like, there were moments where in the household, my dad wasn't the best, even, and it would manifest itself physically. And I think that was part of what he believed his masculinity was back then.
Okay.
And so that example I also took on.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by took on?
Like, for instance, I've never been like physically abusive with any woman ever, right? Thank the Lord. But my dad was. So I think I've always seen that as a possibility, something to happen. And it's not great, right? Number one. And then the second thing is, with us as his kids, like, you step out of line too much, you're getting a beating, homie. Because that's part of him being the man of the house, right? Like, kind of thing. And we never really had the opportunity to sit and talk and explain how we're feeling or explain our emotions or whatever. So it was always his way
or the highway. Okay.
Right? It's like,
but if you had an opportunity to explain how you felt about that part of him, how do you think that conversation would have gone from your side specifically?
Like how I felt about him, or how I felt in general, in
general about I guess the abuse that you saw.
Yeah, I mean that's tough, right? So like, and there's two parts to that question. So the first part is like, had I had the opportunity to speak to my dad about the emotions,
yes,
how do I think that would have come up? That's the first question. And then the second one, I guess, is about the abuse, right? So the first one is, I think now, as a grown man, if that was my experience of being able to speak to my father about how I was feeling about things, and to have him listen to me, and have him actually like regard what I was saying as important, as opposed to just be like, I don't want now kind of thing, it would have made me a much better partner to my partners there.
Okay.
Or a much better friend to my friends.
Okay.
Because then at least it becomes a normal thing, especially a male person, and have a conversation about, hey man, I don't like this. This is the thing. This is how I think we must fix it. Or this is how it makes me feel.
Yeah.
Because I don't think most men ever say that to people. Hey, this is how this thing makes me feel.
Yeah.
Because perhaps that's not masculine, right? Would have made me a much better friend, I think. Because there are a lot of friendships that I've had in my life where I think a conversation could have easily sorted this thing out, as opposed to, let's get aye. You know what I mean?
But also it's not a normal conversation, right? It's a very vulnerable one. Because if we're going to speak about feelings, it means we have to open ourselves up.
No, and that's what I mean. Okay. And having a present father in the house, to whom I could have those conversations with, I think would have easily led me there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As opposed to, I can imagine if someone had tried to make me speak about my feelings with one of my friends, and when I was younger, I was like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, either, because, I'm a stubborn guy, right? Like, either Rautwana or okay, it's also, or, mazish kind of thing, which is not cool. So I think it would have made me a better friend. And then the second part of your kind of question, I think, is if I'd had the opportunity to speak to my dad about how it made me feel, seeing some of the things that he did in the household, I think would have improved our relationship much earlier than what it did. Because then I'd like to believe it would have led to him realizing the severity and the depth of his actions on his children, and therefore what the impact was having on his kids, especially his boys.
Yeah.
Like me and my brother, like reborn this thing. And I think it would have been like, he would have stopped much earlier. I think his caring side would have probably like lifted a little bit more towards me and my brother. And I think he would have had a much broader understanding of what was happening with us as his children in the house. And so overall, the relationship would have been much better, much sooner. I mean, eventually it got okay as I became a man and started to understand some things, but it would have become much better, much sooner. In fact, as I'm speaking to you now, I also think it probably would have improved my relationship with my brother as we both became men. And my relationship with him today would be much better, I think.
So would you say that the masculinity that you and your brother hold is different
today?
Given that you observed the same male figure, how do you think it was absorbed by your brother in relation to you?
I think naturally, just because we're different people.
Naturally, yeah.
The same experience is going to give you a different result. Yeah. But I think the almost like uninformed, unthought through answer to your question is yes. I think the masculinity, how it plays out in our lives today, is different.
Okay.
And I can't speak for him, so I'll speak for myself. Like for me, I've been fortunate enough to have other role models come into my life later.
Yeah.
Number one. I've also been fortunate to have like access to certain spaces where like I could see that, oh man, things can actually be different. And therefore then ask like, is this the person I want to be, as opposed to this is what a man should be.
Okay.
Which I think a lot of dudes don't have that luxury or that opportunity, right? Which is why actually when we came up with this episode, I kept asking myself the question, like, is it important to redefine masculinity? Or are we actually just trying to take a masculinity back to its source or its essence?
Okay.
Right? And I still don't know the answer to that. So, that's this conversation.
But also I think that's the thing, right? For me, I'm just like, could we ever even define it? Right? Could we ever dare to say, okay, this is the definition of masculinity, and that's how it's going to work? And I think for me it would be very silly, if not oblivious of us, to think that we could come up with a definition that encompasses bunna and maleness globally, right? That's impossible because I think masculinity shows itself up differently in different parts of the world.
Okay, so then if you say that, so then bunna for banna, which naturally means black man, what do you think society expects bunna to look like? You can name like two or three things.
I think now, I think they want us to be a bit more accessible. I think the black male has been so closed off, both psychologically and otherwise, that even the females or even the black males are almost incapable of getting to them, right? Okay. And I think
closed off how? Sorry.
No, in the sense of like when you speak to a lot of gents around their mental health or mental wellness specifically, you realize the inconsistencies around how we deal with issues, right? And I think part of the masculinity train is this behavior of, when things are not going well at work or at home, what do? We meet, we get drunk, we get debaucherous, we reminisce on the days where we didn't have partners and we were living our best lives as single men. And then, some even go to the extreme and do other stuff, right? But the reality is, I think what I've come to pick up is that when a man does not deal with his own emotions, with his own feelings, with his own insecurities, with his own fears, he becomes the most destructive thing in society. And when you look at our stats as a country, right, when it comes to gender-based violence, even the suicide rate. I mean, black males hold a record for suicide. I think it's globally right now, right? And that's scary. Because then for me, the question then is, what is happening to a black man psychologically, spiritually, and otherwise? Why are we struggling to exist? Why are we struggling to journey with ourselves, with our families, and the people around us, right?
Yeah.
Like, and when I look at some of the men that have taken their lives, who, you know, were in similar circles with us, like when Ricky passed, right? I didn't know Ricky that close, but, you know, I guess spaces collided once in a while here and there. But I think for me, his passing hit me because he's my age. Right? He was my age. And in my mind, I've always thought to myself, you know what? All of us, a lot of us are doing well, or most of us seem to be doing well, you know, and you look at his life, right? You know, the brands, the fashion, the lifestyle and everything else. And you're thinking, homie's doing well. He's okay. Right?
And there are a lot of people, by the way.
And there's a lot of people who do that, right? Yeah. And he's just one example of such, right? But when you actually look at it at a deeper level, you realize homies are sometimes using exactly those things, right? The money, the fame, the clothes, the style, the excess, as a facade, right? To hide their actual pain, right? And I think for me, that's where it hit me, because I was just like, Ricky could have been me, right? But also Ricky could have been me specifically because in 2019, I went through a very dark patch, right? Where I became very disruptive. I started drinking heavily, right? And I was a bit dysfunctional, right? But I think the difference for me was that I would never show up to work drunk or tipsy or whatever it may be, right? I would never show up like that. But when I got home, that was my time to have a bottle of wine, right? Sometimes even 2. Come the weekend, it's 3 bottles or whatever it may be. And when you look at it incrementally, you realize...
alone or with friends?
It didn't matter.
Okay.
So whether I was drinking with friends or drinking alone, I drank, right? And there was no... Because generally my system was Monday to Friday, that's when I do my running, that's when I do my training. I don't drink, I only drink on the weekend. That had always been my structure, right? But at that point, that didn't exist. So if I got home and I had a terrible day, I'd drink. If I got home and I didn't know what to do, I'd drink. And it became a pattern, right? And I realized that even at that point in time, I was so unhappy about a lot of the things that are happening in my life professionally. I felt misplaced. I felt like what I was doing was not making sense. I felt like, you know, this whole thing of me being called into the priesthood was probably the worst thing that has happened to me.
Really?
I was tempted to go back to corporate because it's like, you know what, if the church is this difficult, I might as well go play with the real wolves, right? Because those ones are not pretentious. They show you who they are. Zisuga, right? And you expect the church to be different. But I think some of the things that were happening at that point in time made me feel like I was in the wrong place.
But how's that, like those things that were happening and you haven't touched on them, we don't have to in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, how is that linked to your masculinity and the expectation of what society what masculinity is?
Okay.
Because if you think about what society effectively thinks masculinity should be in the main, right? Or what we as dudes think is, this is what it looks like for you to be a man, right?
Yeah.
It's like you must provide. Whoever you're providing for, you must provide.
Yeah.
Provide for your mom, provide for your wife, provide for your chick, whatever. Provide. You're a provider.
Yeah.
Right? Number 2, you must be strong. Like, you must have an element of strength, right? Whatever that looks like, right? And
show no signs of weakness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what I was about to get to is like, however this conversation is going to roll out, most people do not believe vulnerability is strength. Let's be clear about that. And then the third one is like, okay, so you're a provider, you must be strong, and you must lead somehow. Right? I don't know what you're leading, but you must lead.
Just walk in front.
Okay? Just be someone who leads.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. is this really it?
So at the end, so that's what I wanted to come to, right? It was in that moment of being in that dark space where you realize, am I good enough as a dad? Am I good enough as a husband? Am I good enough as a son? Right? Am I good enough as a friend? Right? Yeah. And literally the answers to all of it is no. You're terrible.
So were you actually asking, am I providing for my family?
Literally.
Am I strong enough for my wife
and
child?
Can I even protect my family?
My wife and child? Or my mom?
Yeah.
And am I leading? Right? If you assume these three things are the thing. And your general answer back then was what?
And the answer right there and then was like, no. Right? Okay. And I think, the spiral went on for so long that eventually my wife said to me, she's like, look, dude, I didn't marry an alcoholic. If this is the type of man that you want to be, you can be this without me.
Okay.
But I will not expose myself or your child to this. Right? Okay. And it was
you spiraled.
I spiraled like heavily. Right? And it was at that moment in time where you realized, flip, I'm losing myself. And I think for me, that was the biggest wake-up call where I realized that the man that I had worked so hard to become was disappearing. Mm-hmm. And I was just becoming another statistic of a failed black man.
Did you at any point during that period, if we use you as like an example, did you speak to your boys about this? About what you were going through?
Nah, I drank with them though.
Okay. So you did not speak to them?
Nah.
Didn't tell them the details, didn't tell them what. So in their mind, all was well. Because you were showing up for the drinking sessions.
I was showing up, I looked good. The misconception was that I was okay.
Okay.
Right?
Why didn't you talk to
and I also became quite flashy. Okay. And I think I didn't talk to my boys because I didn't want them to realize that I was in my moment of weakness, right?
Okay.
I wanted them to see me as, I'm still on the hill, I'm still doing well, I'm still, I'm achieving all the things that I said I'd achieve, because I never wanted to be a failure. And to feel like I'm failing and then communicate to people, I'm failing, guys. That's tough, right? When you've modeled your life around winning, when you've modeled your life around achieving and doing well, when these things stop or they get into a moment of like being frozen, it becomes difficult to face up to and say, guys, I'm a failure, right? Because you're so used to winning that you want to maintain that story of I'm still winning.
So failing at something doesn't fit the masculinity box.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so then if you carry this thing through, if you fail at something, you're not masculine and therefore you're not a man. Okay. So most
the men we don't respect in society are the men that we feel are failures.
Okay.
Right? If you peel the idea of what a man is, right? Yeah. If you look at the men that we respect in society, it's men who seem to have money, seem to have power, be it political power or social power, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. Men who, can speak well and can stand up in a crowd and show up. But a guy that walks into the room and looks like, he probably didn't take a bath, his hair looks untidy, he doesn't have a car, he's been unemployed for the past 5-6 years. When those gents come chill in the same circle with the ones that we respect, that's the last guy we want to hear anything from, right? If anything else, we know the usual meme Koka sees, that's the ice boy, right? That's the guy who, when we go out as Machita, who work and we've done well, when we want to buy ice or drinks, whatever it is, that's the guy we like, hey, Zamoraka ice, right? And we treat them like kids, right? You even give them cash, it's like, Zamoraka ice. Because I think we've stripped them of their manliness so much that all that they are is little boys. And that is why we treat them the way we do, right? And we use our money once again as a form of control, right? And I think for me, that's where masculinity becomes toxic, right? Is when it devalues another man purely because that man does not fit the mold of what society sees as success.
You've actually just taken toxic masculinity and redefined it.
Okay.
Given it another definition. You're saying men can be toxic to other men based on how they place that man in society relative to how kind of the regular toxic masculinity thing, or at least how we think it's defined, is like men being toxic to women, which I think we'll get to.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think for me, it's always one of those, like, how dare you devalue another man, right?
Just based on
just because where now you have a car, you have a degree, you have whatever. He may be a gardener, or even a guy who's in recycling who collects boxes every morning, right? You don't see bonna ba gagwe.
What's the impact of that?
Right.
Though?
I think the impact of that is that it creates a deep-seated anger, right? It creates a deep-seated sense of aggression, and I think you can see it in some of the situations where, if I don't feel like a man at work, and I'm constantly being mistreated and spoken down to and sent left, right, and center and dehumanized, where do I show my manliness? When I get home, right? That is where I remind everyone there, I'm the man here, right? When I'm in spaces outside of the space that devalues me, or outside of the space that reminds me I'm not man enough, that's when I'm most violent. That's when I'm most aggressive, because now I need to show you that I'm a man, right? And I think,
Yeah, but it's that show you that I'm a man that's also an issue, right?
Because remember, it's that whole thing of, I want you to notice my presence, but not just notice it, I want you to feel it, right? It is no different to, simple, and I think we've all had this, right? The security and the guy in the car's gymnastics, where you get to a boom gate, and by virtue of you are in the car, you are now dictating to the security guard, and when they start to challenge you and they start to ask for things, when they start to want to check certain things because that is what their companies told them to do, a fight begins, right? But even then, sometimes the security guard is like, actually, when it comes to the boom going up or down,
this is me.
I have the power.
Yeah.
It's not you.
Yeah.
You are in your car, but I can decide gate or not. And if I don't open it, what are you going to do? Drive through the boom. You're going to mess up your car, right? And that is where, different ways of masculinity show up, right? And in some spaces, if you go to like the boys' schools specifically, boys are taught when you shake someone's hand, you need to...
Strong.
You must shake it strong, and you must look them straight in the eye, because a real man does not shake gently and doesn't look down. A real man looks you straight in the eye to show you I'm not scared of you, right? And that's what a lot of boys in boys' schools are taught, and I think specifically the traditional boys' schools, right? That's the culture, and you feel it in the handshake, right? Where it gets quite tough, and there's some men who will even shake your hand and then turn your hand so that they show you where the power actually is, right? Because it's that whole thing of I'm above you, right? And so it's those small microaggressions that show up physically, that highlight that whole conversation around what makes me a man, right? It is how, back in the days, if you had big muscle, you're the man, right? Being a lean-looking man like the two of us was never considered something. They don't take us to war, bro. We are probably going to be left in the kitchen to cook for the soldiers, right? Because we're not built, right? And even then, that is where you realize that dynamism of masculinity is such a huge and diverse thing, and it's translated differently for different men.
Do you talk to your boys today?
A lot, and I think for me that's part of the
Not
thing.
Not just about like random stuff, bro. Do you guys talk about things that, if you were to look at it through the lens of how people define masculinity, this would not be a masculine thing to do?
We're doing that right now, right?
Yeah, no, forget this.
No, but I think your question is, do I talk to my boys? And you're one of my boys, and that's exactly what we're doing now, right? And it's even worse because we're doing it in a public space, right? We're basically talking about bunna and speaking about our own experiences of understanding this thing, right?
So
and I think
let me ask the question differently.
The wider circle, we've started to talk about these things, but previously it wasn't the norm. It's something that I think, honestly speaking, I've found that post-COVID, myself and a lot of the gents that I hang out with started to be a bit more vulnerable with each other. Like post-COVID, that's where we found out who has anxiety, who has depression, who's on depression meds, who's on what. And right then you're like, oh, flip. Homies are going through the most, right? But before that, we didn't know any of this, right? And like one of my close mates, I was in his house and I was looking for something, went to his bedroom, and he was like, top drawer, As I opened, I realized homie was on anxiety and depression meds, right? I didn't know this. And immediately when you find out, you realize that your support and your journey with that homie has to shift from what it's been, right? But at the same time, I can't just walk out the bedroom with those maids. It's like, what's up, right?
What's up?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But then it then means that you have not created a space for that homie to feel comfortable enough to tell you, this is where I am, right? And I think for me, it made me very conscious around how do I create those moments and opportunities and spaces for the homies around me to be comfortable enough to share their views, right?
Without judgment.
Without judgment. And I think that's the most important thing, right? Is that it has to happen without judgment. Yes. But it also has to happen with, at the end of the day, it cannot be a thing of, Maralwena, what were you thinking? Right? I can't do that, right? I can't ridicule you for opening up and being vulnerable. I must listen, I must engage, and hopefully get you thinking about what you brought to the table differently. Right. That's for me. That would be, I guess that would be positive masculinity, right? A space where men can sit around a table and share, what they're going through, how they're feeling, and digest it together. And when you walk up with each other, and when you walk away from the table, have the ability to say, you know what? I can see a different angle to this. I can do this differently.
Okay. So there's clearly and definitely a need and an opportunity for men to speak to each other.
Yeah.
Which is, the primary reason for us actually doing this podcast and putting ourselves in this incredibly uncomfortable position is because part of the solve has to be with us.
Yes.
Between us. As Majimbo.
No one else can save us.
And I like that you kind of taken this toxic masculinity thing and inadvertently redefined it that men can be toxic to each other as well. So let's deal right? Because if we don't look out for each other, who's going to look out for us, right? If right?
Yeah.
It's actually what we're headed for, like hell.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I think that's important. So thank you for that. The thing I want to get on now is the toxic masculinity the other way around.
Okay.
And this one, I must be honest, I don't know much about this.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I can opine a lot on this. So I'm just going to speak from what I've seen out there, which is like, hey, a lot of women, a lot of our female partners believe that black men in particular are toxic. What exactly is that? Like, I don't know. What does that mean?
So I think once again, I neither am I an expert on this one, but I think in the conversations that I've had, it has largely been around the fact that we use patriarchy within the African space specifically only when it most benefits us. Right? So we will use SIDS or to oppress women. We will use tradition and certain things that are attached to tradition to oppress the women in our lives, right?
Like example?
And I think, so for me, it's simple things around, how a woman approaches the household, right? There are gents who, in the 21st century, we don't care if our wives are wearing pants, shorts, bum shorts. No one actually cares, right? Just as long as she's comfortable and she's happy, that's good for her. But I think, there's still situations where some guys, want to make sure that they are the man, and regardless of what happens, at the end of the day, right? It is their house. They make the rules. So if they say to you, when I come home from work, you need to have made sure you've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you will not dress in a certain way, right? But also there's also a control factor with some of the black men, right? Where we have access to money or whatever it may be, and we use that to control. Right. But I think the toxicity for me actually does not lie entirely in the material. The toxicity with black men that I think black women, and I do not speak on behalf of them, that black women I think have the most issue about is the fact that we don't speak. We never speak about our feelings. We never really share about the things that hurt us and how we are finding ourselves at different points in our lives, right? All we do is lash out. We lash out, we become debaucherous, And then once we've realigned, then we're nice again, we're sweet. Something goes wrong, we spiral again. And we keep going through that cycle without wanting to digest and without wanting to get help, right? And I think for me, that going back to the 2019 event, that was the turning point. The turning point was not just saying to my wife, okay, I must stop. The turning point was me realizing I am fading away. And if I'm going to honor the man that I think and say I am, I'm going to have to get help, right? Started seeing a psychologist literally once a week. And it was terrible. Like the first 3-4 months with that psychologist are the worst because you are now peeling all your issues, right? And I realized already that type of help allowed me to redefine what being a man really means for me. And it meant being able to communicate what I feel to my wife, being able to communicate my needs and say to my wife, these are my needs, right? Being able to communicate the same needs to my boss, being able to communicate my boundaries to my wife, to my boss, to my family. And once I began to do that, I became happier, I was less anxious, and I could function differently.
Was that an easy process, the communicating?
It was painful because it meant sitting everyone down, right? Including my dad, where I'd say to him, hey, my man, I feel like you are failing me in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need this from you, right? Which is something that I never used to do before. Because
how did he respond to that, by the way?
I think so funny. The funny thing is that I think he would read the messages, and I'd get a response like 4 or 5 days later.
Oh, so you texted
right?
him. Okay.
And sometimes when we had the conversations face to face, you know, one of the things that always sticks out whenever me and him have these conversations is always, you know, he always pointed out to, you know, even in this argument, you are still fighting for the type of family that you want. And so, yes, it is uncomfortable, it is disruptive, but it also shows that there is something else that has been put on your heart that you're wanting to see happening. And I think that has been the positive about it, is that he's responded quite well. Has he put a lot of it into action? Not really.
Not sure.
But the response was fairly positive. But I think for me right now, right, would be the ideal time to actually then narrow it down, right? And I think in the other sessions we'll speak more about masculinity, because I think every conversation we're going to have is about men, so masculinity will always be looked at. But I think for me, that's what masculinity would be, right? It's that balance of, you know, being strong, being gentle, being vulnerable, having the ability to cry when you need to cry, or when you've lost something that means something to you, that is dear to you, and being able to show up in the world the way you really want to show up. Not the way you think you should show up, but the way you feel would be the most genuine and most real version of self, right? That's what we need to work towards.
That doesn't sound like masculinity to a lot of people. I imagine it's not going to, like, a lot of people are going to hear what you've just said and say, hey, I'm Joe. You know what I mean? Even though, I agree with you, but I'm imagining someone watching this thing and being like, the outlet is the teen outlets. You know, like, what are these guys saying?
We're saying watch the show, because the more you watch, the more you listen to these conversations, the more this will make sense. So I think for me that would be the best answer, right? Because I think it's a journey. It's a journey, right? But what we're wanting
it's one that's necessary.
Yes,
it's one that's absolutely necessary.
We're hoping men will be reflective of themselves and the type of men that they want to show up in the world as. Because I don't think we want to show up as these aggressive, angry people. I think we're tired of that. And so in order for us to be slightly happier, we're going to need to shed the things that we think make us men.
This has been a tough one, man. I won't lie to you. This conversation for me is a tough one.
Okay.
So I think we must find another way of having it. And then whoever's watching this, you know, I don't know, talk to us somehow about what you think we've said, what you think masculinity is. But importantly, we need to get this right for ourselves, by ourselves, as black dudes. Like, we need to, as friends, talk to each other about the things we are going through. We cannot afford to have more men just lose themselves
and die in silence,
like alcohol, drugs, like not feeling like you have a place that you fit in society. You know, we just cannot do that anymore. It's not. can't do that. You know, find someone to talk to. Build a culture within your friendship groups where you guys speak to each other about the stuff. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is absolutely imperative. And it's absolutely important because nobody cares about you more than yourself and the people who are with you and the people who are like you. And they will grow you and you will grow each other. Yeah.
But also remember that those little black boys in your community, in your neighborhood, in your family, they're watching you. They're listening to you. They're learning from you. And I really hope that whatever it is that they're observing is something that you are proud of and something that you really want to energize within your community. And so thank you for joining us. This is Mxnzplain. It's for you. It's for me. It's for us. By us. Kabelo and Lebo. Thank you for joining us.
Well done, brother.
Away, brother.
Cool, man.